Hey, and welcome to, well, I guess the apocalypse, and we'll talk about how it's been for us, and we also want to share some advice on how to kind of like mentally make it through. Yeah, so, I actually had a dream a couple of weeks ago where we were in the midst of a zombie apocalypse, and I just didn't expect the apocalypse to be us being stuck inside and like wearing sweatpants the whole time, but we did put on other clothes just for this video and brushed our hair. So,
In fairness, I do have sweatpants on, but put a nicer sweatshirt
nobody
on.
can see it. Yeah. I think that tells you quite a bit about how it's been for us. I mostly work from home, so it shouldn't theoretically be that much of a change. But when everything's closed here, so where we are, non-essential businesses are basically closed, and when your partner is suddenly working from home as well, that is actually quite a change to one's routine. Even if you're an introvert, I'm really feeling. I really wonder how the extroverts are coping right now, right? Been practicing social distancing since childhood, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a tough situation in a lot of ways. I mean, especially for people who are in one of the higher risk areas, or if you know someone who has it, or I mean, there's just a lot of just your life or the lives of those you care about could be at risk, and that's really really hard. I mean, and more than in a way of, well, we're always just mortal and you never know. I mean, there's kind of more something of like, just, it's really right in your awareness about their vulnerability and impermanence.
Right. Yeah. So I think for us, I think we're definitely arguing more than usual, right? 'Cause,
Yeah, I think that brings me to one thing I was hoping we'd talk about, which is tips for how to make it better through this, especially if you're here with family and other people. One of them is try really hard not to argue less. I do think
not to argue less.
no, to try to argue less.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
I have a good story about that. So I was talking to somebody, and it's sort of like a person who's now working from home. Basically, their second day at work, and now he's suddenly working from home. And his wife is also at home, and he was basically just going on about we'll kill each other before the virus kills us. And then I heard from somebody else that basically the divorce rates were spiking in China after the lockdown. And yeah, so I guess we could also share some tips on how not to get divorced during.
I think, it's helpful to remember that your partner is not the problem. I mean, the situation's hard, and
Sometimes you are. Just kidding. Well, maybe not.
No, sometimes I am. That's also true. But I think that to the extent that you can have compassion for yourselves and for those around you, it just tends to go a lot better. So to the extent you can do that, it's really helpful. And I think that in general, whenever we're stressed and outside of our comfort zone, there can be a desire to control or desire to make things how you want them to, and that can include the people around you, which tends to not go well because what they're hoping for may be very different from what you're hoping for. Right. They may be doing the same thing.
Yeah. So I've been coaching quite a few people on the coronavirus stuff because it just every person you talk to basically comes up. So I can share some of the common themes that I've seen. And it seems like there's a disruption to the routine that's going on for almost everyone, particularly if you're a parent and your kids are suddenly home as well, or similar drastic changes to your routine. And I think in that case, it becomes very important to see if you can find a schedule that works. And honestly, also being kind with yourself, because it's probably going to take a while to find a new routine. There are things that can help in terms of productivity, which is there's a tool called the Pomodoro technique. Basically, set a timer, work for 25 minutes, no distractions unless the house is on fire, you're on fire, or the dog is on fire. As one of my friends put it in one of her posts about how to work from home, yeah. So you basically work for 25 minutes, no distractions, and after the 25 minutes you take a 5-minute break. And that can be helpful because honestly, if you focus on your main priorities, even if you work much less, you can still get a lot done. Like there are people who have to drastically reduce their working hours, but they still get the main things done just because they really focus on the main priorities and not on the tiny things that don't really matter that much ultimately. Yeah. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think, in addition to this, it's really helpful to, I guess in terms of your overall life, is to keep focused on if you have spiritual practices or other things like self-reflection or even just self-care things, just to, you may think that you don't need them, but just to really schedule in time, like, yeah, I'm just going to do something that's nice for myself, or I'm going to do something that helps me stay centered. And there can be, a really opportunity for practice and for knowing yourself more and growth during this period, even though it's because it's so hard.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've mentioned this many times. So for me, I typically stop meditating when I most need it. So basically things are going fine. I'm regularly meditating. Then, the apocalypse happens and I stop meditating, which is
Corona-apocalypse.
The Corona-apocalypse. Ironically, or just when I need it the most, I don't do it. So,
yeah, can I add another thing? So,
sure.
I think during this period, there's the self-care, and then there's also, reaching out for support.
Right.
When you need
yes,
it.
Definitely.
Like I've been, worked last week with one of the people that support me with healing, and it was just really, really valuable and really needed. So either, I mean, unless you're having also the financial situation, which is really bad for some people. I mean, not to make light of that or assume everyone's in a financial situation where they can do this, but I think for many people, I mean, even if there could be unpaid options or just community things where people support each other.
There may be emergency hotlines.
Yeah,
and so on and so
there can be a lot of things
yeah.
like that. But for those of you who are in a position where you do have some financial resources to sign up for things, this can be a really great time to really lean into your support network that way. And speaking of that, I mean, Bear and I are planning to offer a course starting on Saturday, specifically focused on the coronavirus, where we're going to go deeper into these things. It's going to be a bit more of a spiritual orientation than, just typically some of the work you love stuff.
Right.
But, if that's something that would be interesting to you within the Trillium Awakening context, please let me know and we can see if that might be a good fit for you. But I think we both just really love to be in service during this time. I think it will, in the midst of all this, I was thinking well, what the hell can I do? And this is something that, we can do together, is just to offer a respite and a place for support.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in the description so you can check that out. Yeah, so I mean, I think some of the tips are, schedule times where you're actually productive. If you have other people around, for instance, you have to take care of kids, you can obviously take runs.
You mean trade off where one does it and then the other does it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in general, you can use that too. So one thing that typically riles people up quite a bit is reading the news. But then a lot of people now also don't feel comfortable not reading the news at all. So for instance, what I suggested to a client today is something that we're practicing. I tend to not get that caught up in the news. Elijah does. And so when he's when he's sort of going down a route with reading the news, at some point it's just, okay, Bear, you go read the news and just tell me if something important happens. And then you just need to make sure what important means, or since it basically gets, it just seems like there's a lot happening each day, kind of having some criteria for what then needs to be reported and what doesn't. So,
So that's a few tips. I think we had the compassion for yourself and for others around you.
Yeah.
You had the work schedule, the kind of focusing your work attention, and if you have kids, trading off. We had the delegating or trading off between who reads the news, reaching out for support.
Yeah.
and finding times to do self-care. So that's a lot of tips. 5, I think.
But yeah. So I mean, and really, I think it can also be interesting to ask yourself, where do you want to be when this is over? Because there's one thing to keep in mind, and I think there's like the story about a king who asked somebody to kind of like offer something for him that would always be true. And I'm completely botching up the story, but it's 9:30 p.m. and it's been a long week, so just bear with me telling it completely imperfectly. And the guy gave him a ring that said, "This too shall pass." And that's so true about everything. This will pass. And the question is, where would you want to be ideally when this is over, whenever that is? And how would you have wanted to use that time? And of course, if you're being super anxious and panicked right now, the first step is to kind of like get to a place where you're less anxious and panicked, because we're not doing anybody any favor, when we're basically just operating from fight or flight. So if you're already kind of like in a relatively calm state, or whatever that means given the situation, then it's a good time to think about what can you take away from this? What does it mean for you? Like, so for instance, for us, we've been thinking about, what does it mean where we would like to be now? Where would you want to be quarantined if you had to be quarantined? Because that tells you something about where you want to live and the people you want to be around with, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of teaching that can happen in this situation too. Learning to deal with intense emotions, becoming, like prepared if something like that would ever happen again. And just really focusing on what matters most, because I think one thing that's interesting to see is that you notice very quickly what's essential and what isn't essential. So, for instance, I'd like to get a haircut, but that's probably not essential, right? Yeah. Yeah, anything else?
I think that's good.
Okay, so yeah, to summarize, we've told you how it's going for us, which is, well...
It varies.
Yeah, it varies. And then we've given you a bunch of tips on how to use that. So maybe try at least one of them if you haven't already. And if you want to find out more about the course we're doing, just check out the details below, and we'd really love to support you if you like. And yeah, stay safe. And
take care. Bye.
Hope to see you on the other side of this. Bye.